All the way from Colorado.
Yay! How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm so good. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I got
You
on.
always know what you're doing. I feel like you can just figure stuff out. Like I was just talking about you because you play such a pivotal role in our branch here in Oregon from all the way from Colorado and your relationship with Shelby. And I'm just excited to be able to talk to you tonight.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
So let's start. Can you introduce yourself and just tell the audience a little bit about what you do with regard to dyslexia
Sure.
and where you're at?
Sure. So I'm here in Denver, Colorado. I actually realized I got into this stuff 22 years ago because my kid, I went to this meeting at the school when my kid was in like kindergarten, first grade. I think it was first grade. And they looked at me and they said, well, we think your kid's going to have trouble learning to read. And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I know nothing. I don't know about reading. I just put my kid in this little touchy feely wonderful school and I don't know what to do. And so all those many years ago, in order to support my kid, I learned a lot about how kids learn to read and about dyslexia and about, what it really takes for kids to succeed. And so at this point, I have a company and I have people that train teachers in the Orton Gillingham method called Orton Gillingham International. Hopefully we're going to be in Oregon. We train all over the country, but we just got an outreach from somebody in Oregon. And I have a nonprofit called Every Child Reading that I offered you a summer job. You can come anytime, where we work with kids intensively doing OG for 5 weeks. And this summer we did it virtually. So I should have called you because you could have come and, virtually, but it wouldn't have been as much fun.
Well, I was hoping the conference was going to be in Colorado because I was excited about maybe doing some running up there and but I'll tell you what, I would love to participate whether it be virtually or in person just because I believe in what you're doing so much. So
Well,
let's
and I have to tell you right now, I've really come to like a big thing, which is we've got to reach the at-risk kids that aren't getting taught to read. Because Sam was really lucky. He had a mom, and my parents helped fund tutoring, and I will always say I made every mistake in the world there was to make, from bad tutors to bad intervention to bad choices. And then I decided I'd become his tutor, which was the worst choice ever, right?
No, I don't think that was the worst choice ever.
Well, it was a really bad choice because he and I couldn't work together. But I lived with a profoundly dyslexic attention deficit kid who learns things the hard way, and it's an interesting thing to have learned what I learned and know what I know and parent a child. So I'm really good at advising other people.
Well, it's funny that you're mentioning that because I was listening to something this morning. It was Talk Sports Radio, but they were talking about the most people with the biggest growth mindsets are the ones that just kind of pick a direction, they go, and when it doesn't work, they switch and they kind of keep turning the corner, and that's how you become great. Is like you just kind of keep throwing it out there and figuring it out. And it sounds like that's the approach you took. It's probably the approach my parents took. Like I was fortunate to come from a supportive background as well, and I just recognize that where my passion lies is very similar to yours. Is I recognize there's a lot of students that are in underserved areas that aren't getting the help they need, and that's the people we need to reach because they're the most at risk, they're the most critical, and they're the ones that need support. They need the emotional support to know that they're capable, that they are going to be fine, but they just have a challenge with regard to how we learn within a system that wasn't built for us.
Well, and I think beyond that, I talked to a lot of people, and I think I was laughing the other day. I was talking to a director at a big district around here about identification and early identification and ELL students. And I said, one of the first things I see is I get calls from parents, and they're like, well, they wouldn't give my child an IEP because they were an ELL student. And I said, well, do you speak another language in your home? And they're like, no. Oh, but you know, you look Hispanic, or you look Iranian, or you look, you know, Chinese, and because your child has all those dyslexic like tendencies, they aren't able to communicate well enough to say, but my kid can't read. And I think especially in low income families, they assume that schools do the right thing.
Yeah. Right.
Right. And I don't want to make teachers wrong, because we know a lot of teachers didn't really know how to teach kids how to read. And that was why I kind of reached this point, because I did so much legislative work over the years. You know, I kicked off some of the stuff in Colorado, and we worked nationally, and, you know, on all these committees. And I thought, that's not where the solution lives. The solution lives in training teachers. The legislation may be a way to connect those pieces, but man, those teachers need support. It's like asking somebody to do brain surgery when they're a psychiatrist. You know, just because somebody is a teacher doesn't mean they understand how to teach reading.
Yeah, and that's where you go back to the fundamentals of getting them in the right opportunities to learn a system that is more inclusive of everyone and brings everyone to the table versus the traditional methods of reading, perhaps.
So how do you do that?
Well, that was my question for you.
I honestly, I think that one of the ways that we do that is by communication and by building relationships, because I know that people know when they talk to me, they can trust me, because number one, I'm honest. Number two, the things that we have done, the data that we have is a really strong data in terms of training teachers. And again, I think you know, I mean, we're in this midst of this like crazy chaos moment where I wish I could give every teacher a bottle of wine, you know, a dinner, whatever, because I don't know what it's like where you guys are, but I can tell you what it's like here. Is it's a real shit show, because you don't know if you're going to be teaching virtually, you're going to be in person. If you're a SPED teacher and you have to write, a friend of mine is a speech language pathologist, which is that language based stuff, 85 reports, 85 how are more than one bottle whatever your name is. I mean, because the weight on teachers in this moment is so incomprehensible. You know, it started out when everything went online and teachers didn't know how to do it, or one teacher would be really good and other wouldn't know how to do it. That districts didn't really understand, you know, what it's going to take to make it work. And then how do you train all these people? And so now, sorry, I got to lean over here and get a Kleenex. I don't know where my Kleenex went. How do you train all these people on technology, on implementation, on all of the amazing things that they now have to be able to do? And so, you know, my heart really goes out to them. You know, before it was like, well, they need to learn how to teach kids to read. Now I'm like, oh my goodness. You know, I mean, if they're in school, they're at risk of getting COVID. They're dealing with, like we ended up doing virtual because I couldn't picture. I know my kids hug, they touch, they get close to each other. It just is how it is. And I was watching at the playground up the street, and it's like, yep, it's just what I knew was going to happen. Those kids are within, you know, they're face to face being together. Thank heavens they can be together. But, you know, you just kind of got to, here's fingers crossed, keep your fingers crossed they don't get sick. So in this moment for teachers, I just think that gentle kindness and that concern and that care. And, you know, I'm getting pretty good at the virtual tutoring, so I'm going to, you know, share some stuff about that. But it's hard enough to do what you're good at, let alone having to do 50,000 things that you never thought you were going to have to do in your life. So I'm a fan of compassion and care and kindness. So I think that, and then let's teach them all how to teach reading.
Yeah, right. Give them the empathy that they need during this time, especially, right? And then let's provide them with tools that we can get it. And I don't, it's interesting that the way you say this, and I'd be curious to get your thought on it, but I don't see it any different for the students that are going through it, right? Like the students need the empathy and the compassion and the understanding of their strengths and their passions, and then put the reading instruction on top of that. But if you try to just throw the tools at them uh, right away, it's not going to work. But you tell me, you're the expert.
How many good teachers have you had in your life? Teachers that changed your life?
Well, I think one, I'm really fortunate. I want to say I'm really fortunate to have the teachers in my life, and it started with my parents. You know, my parents were amazing coaches. So I feel fortunate. I had a second grade teacher that counted all my spelling on my spelling test as long as I had the letters.
Oh,
No,
she
like,
let you.
yeah.
Oh.
So like if I would spell the word prepare and I spelled it pear pre, she would just put the arrows, like you switch the 3 and the 4 there, uh, and she'd give me credit. So I had those types of experiences. Now I've also had some challenges, and I can get into some of that too if you want. But so I look at myself and my situation, as hard as it was, as hard as I had to work in the classroom, I was fortunate. My concern is for those students that are not in those types of opportunities.
Well, and I always talk about Jose Villarreal, and I don't know if he's still around. He was my high school English teacher, and he said, "You're a good writer." And I was like, man, I'm good at something, you know? And not only that, I'm good at something I kind of like. He says I'm a good writer. And Jose Villarreal is a pretty big name to remember for a lot of years. We're not going to say how many. But it was one of those moments that I have never forgotten, because that was someone who saw me. And I can tell you, in every OG training that we give, I 99% of them I get to talk. And one of the things I say every time is that what you really hold, like I'm pretty good at teaching reading. I'm probably great at teaching reading.
Yeah.
But what I'm really good at is holding the heart of a child and seeing who they are. Because when I look at you and I know who you are, it doesn't matter if your behavior is miserable or you're aggressive, because we usually know that that's those kind of behaviors when kids are really feeling insecure. But
Right.
if I can know who you are, that's how I change your life. And then get really good at teaching reading, because those are the skill things. I can't teach you to look into a child's heart. You have to be able to do that. And I have to tell you what I love. And this summer, you're going to get stuck working at camp. I don't know how it's going to work, but you're committed. The teachers all say the same thing. They say this is the real opportunity we have to do what we love. We're not boggled down with paperwork, with people that don't understand what we're doing, with all this stuff. We get to sit with a kid and teach them how to read. And it boggles my mind that during the course of their days, they're spending 9 months of a year so boggled down in paperwork that they don't feel good about how they're able to meet kids' needs. And then for these 5 weeks in the summer, they're rocking with the kids. And it makes my heart sing.
Oh, that's amazing. I was gonna say, on a side note, you need to hire Shelby to be your agent because she says you do a lot of things really well. So,
My
um,
agent. I just like Shelby for my friend and my jewelry maker.
so we are with the International Dyslexia Association Oregon branch. I'm gonna read through some of these comments to make sure we don't have some questions. Here we got one. The school district I work in is doing well online learning, and I know as a paraeducator that I don't know how to recognize if someone is dyslexic other than not wanting to read during class. So maybe some advice there for that
Well,
person.
I think your point is really well made. One of the first things I'll ask when I talk to people is like, what's your favorite book? If you find those avoiders, the bathroom goer tours, listen to the speech. That's a big thing, because especially if you're working with younger kids, that speech language things, those Biscotti kids, you'll start to listen. And then if you watch the behaviors, watch the writing, not backwards B's and D's, that can sometimes at a young age be a red flag. But if you listen and you watch the writing, kids that spell with no vowels. So the question is it instructional, or is it a learning disability? And I don't want to call it a learning disability, but a learning challenge. We have to use the word disability to buy services. Because I've never met a disabled kid. The only kids I've met that were disabled by the system, because the system didn't see where their strengths were. So, that's really cool. So what are some of the other, I mean, I like I said, you listen to them read, you watch them write, but the language is the biggest thing. Is kids get older in middle school, high school, they just won't read.
Right.
They won't read. My son will tell you that he's read one book, but I can also tell you that he deeply studies things that I'm like blown away at what he knows. But he doesn't do it traditionally. He does it, whether it's YouTube or he watches the what you call it channel on TV, National Geographic, that he has a passion for learning, but really truly it doesn't feel he's not as confident a reader as he needs to be to pick up a book. And when I say book, we're no longer talking about books. I mean, we're talking about a device or whatever to read. And so who designates what learning really is? Is there something wrong with the way he's learning? Because frankly, I mean, he wasn't someone who did well in school. Can I tell you a funny story?
Yeah, please.
So he got in trouble. One of the times he got in trouble, he got busted for doing something just dumb as dirt. And I'm not going to say what it was, but I was in the office with the assistant principal, and the assistant principal whips out this piece of paper, and it has the name of every kind of marijuana and every strand and what it and something else scientific, and handed it to me. And he said, "What do you think about this?" And I said, "Well, I'd have him write a paper. It seems like it's really engaged him." And the guy was like appalled. "Well, my son works in a dispensary. This is something that's interesting to him." And the reality is that he potentially is somebody who could make large quantities of money because this is what he's into. Now, while I don't agree with the way he self-medicates his attention deficit, he does it brilliantly. And what I would tell parents and teachers is that, our kids that are severely attention deficit in this world, you live in a legal state too. Some of them are using those things to self-medicate. Wouldn't be my choice. However, it was his passion. And who am I to judge his passion? And they lost him if they had him write a paper and then worked with the teacher that taught law and learned the legalities of it, because he loved that class, it might have changed a bit of the trajectory for him. Because he went on to he's doing better now, but he went on to struggle mightily, and didn't thrive in school.
It's interesting that you say that, because the topic of video games comes up a lot for me, like talking to parents and like, well, what do I do about my kid who just wants to play video games? I was like, well, use it as a tool, right? If their passion is video game, you can say, hey, I want you to set up a budget for when you need a new system, when you're going to want new games, what that's going to look like, how much you could teach a kid to budget off of video games of, oh, well, I know that I'm going to want this game, and I'm going to, so they can start to put the pieces together. You could have them teach them how to write a paper about their, favorite game and talk about that, or like even
write
reading
a new character. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So
Totally.
you can create within the passions, which I think would be a way, to your point, of how to engage somebody's strengths, and like, rather than squash it, rather than fear it, like dive into it, go deeper with it, and like build it out.
Well, and there's somebody I really like that I follow on Facebook, and his name is Troy Horn. And one of his kids' passion is video games, and he is a contender. I mean, this kid is like, I totally don't get this, okay? But he is a competitor, and he is at the top. Another kid that I met really was into video games. And I said, well, I have a friend that works for a game development company. Well, he did an internship there. Now he's going to UCLA to develop video games. The other thing about video games is attention deficit, right? Goes along with dyslexia oftentimes, more often than not. And families will say, well, you know, my kid can concentrate on a video game for 4 hours. It's like, guess what? They're interested. That's what Jared just said. They've got enough interest in that. So how do we expand that? But, you know, I mean, if we talk about education, there's a school I love in Denver, and they do units, and they do everything wide and they do it deep. So if your passion is video games, it can't be lame.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that we miss in education is that, you know, nobody's good at sitting and listening, but everybody's good at engaging something that they feel strongly about. So, yeah.
And I love that this is coming from an educator's perspective. It's unique.
Well, it's, you know, I started out as a mom, so, you know, my education has been really an opportunity to you know, to learn more. But, you know, best practice education, one of my favorite educators is Anita Archer, and she's in Oregon, and she, you know, it's all about I do, you do, we do. It's all about practicing. It's about engagement. It's about repetition. And the way she teaches, you just get all sparked. I mean, it's just really exciting.
It's the collective.
You know, yeah.
It's the collective.
And like the expeditionary high schools, the expeditionary schools, I think are great. Well, and that's yeah. One of the things where you do this hands-on stuff.
So, and somebody mentioned Edison High School here in Beaverton, which I think kind of uses that format. And the person said at their school, learning differences is acknowledged, and we have Orton Gillingham tutoring. So some positivity there. And please, if you're on the line, feel free to drop us a question. We're here to help. So where do we go from here? Like, what would you love to what would you love to see happen within our education system? I mean, I know it's a broad question, so
me?
Oh, yeah,
because I got to talk about this for days.
Yeah,
because I genuinely think our educational system is failing our children. I don't see how we teach, what we teach is going to help a kindergartner, first grader, fifth grader, eighth grader in the future. Because when we look at our world right here and right now, number one, we don't know what's coming next. Number two, the way in which we're teaching is antiquated. Sit and listen teaching is antiquated. It's not very worthwhile. We know Marianne Wolf, who another one I adore, is really looking at how the brain is changing because of technology. Because, you know, we know that the brain doesn't read naturally. That's manufactured, it's artificial. And that's why dyslexia, right? The parts of the brain that need to activate aren't activating because they're over on the other side of the brain. It's probably flipped because we're on the camera here. That part over here, that powerful, divine, like wonderful, sparky kind of part of the brain that isn't activating, that isn't designed to read.
Right.
It's designed to do all this new stuff. So transforming education, I mean, you know, we'd have to wake up a lot of people to the fact that sitting and listening is not a good way to learn. We had an opportunity this summer with OG training, with the Yoshimoto OG training, Orton Gillingham International. I'll put a little plug in there.
Yeah, as you said. And we can drop me a link, and I'll share it when I share the video. I can add it to the description.
Okay, cool. You know, we had a district, and they said, you know, we're not going to be able to do in-person training. And, you know, I wasn't a fan of going virtual because number one, I've got an attention deficit. So unless it's really engaging, I'm cleaning my desk or playing video games or hanging out, but it's really hard for me to engage. And they kept talking about, it's not asymmetric. What's it called when you just listen, when you're offline and they do a video and you're what's that called?
Oh, like just like where you're
A
just,
something or other.
yeah,
A.
I don't have the terminology, but where it's one dimensional essentially, like you're just
Yeah.
getting the input.
Like what they wanted us to do was like, oh, well, you do this and you make a video and then they watch the video and then they give you feedback. And I'm like, no, that's nuts. Unless it's interactive, unless we can participate, communicate, and really move it forward, what's the point? So I think that's what one of the things we're going to learn out of this whole COVID thing is, how do you create engaging instruction? Because it was like, we took on 30 kids this summer almost at camp, and we had to keep them engaged after they'd already had 3 months of not succeeding in school, of being bored, of having teachers. And this was 99.9% of the parents. We called about 50, 75 parents, and 99% of them, it wasn't engaging. The kid barely showed up. They didn't learn anything. It was really impossible. And so, my thing is community, because what I can tell you is, and you know this as well as I know this, when you get a bunch of kids together to learn, that look at each other and they go, wow, that kid's like me. I'm not quite so dumb. And I
Hmm.
use that word on purpose. Wow, I'm not dumb, stupid, different, incapable, incompetent. There's a person over there and they're really cool and I really like them, and they're struggling with the same thing I am. And all of a sudden what you start to find, right, is you've got your family. You've got your family. Your dyslexic buddies and you know how
Yeah,
to punch each other, right?
right. It
And
changes the game.
yeah, totally. So in the summer camp, that's what we do. Well, my insistence, to the chagrin of some of the people that I was working with, was we had to have community,
Yeah.
period. And I'll tell you what, it was so cool to watch these kids online interacting with each other, talking to each other. You've never been around attention deficit dyslexic, so I know you don't know this, but there are some of them that can't not dominate a conversation, and they have something to say about everything. And we had a little girl who was about 6 years old, and I'll tell you what, those kids were so good with her.
Oh,
And it was so like I was just so heartened by what I watched happen virtually. And so, we had them for two to 2.5 hours, because we had optional oral reading. And we had kids that wouldn't leave the oral reading. Like they just needed somebody to talk to.
yeah.
And they would read and they wouldn't, and watching how they were interacting online, right?
Right.
And it was like, so my hope is that we'll be in person this summer, but I think we'll do both,
Yeah.
so we can have kids from around the country that can't get the services they need.
Well, and let me know because I will, you know, whether it's a day or, talking or have a discussion, I'm there,
Oh, no, 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 no. I want you working at camp. I
I,
want you to take the OG training. You're not going to do tutoring because I'm really neurotic about who I let tutor. You have to
yep.
be good at, although maybe you will be good.
I don't know,
You have to practice. Oh, you're going to be so good. So good.
but
Yeah.
I'm
Anyway.
in, I'm in. I'm down to support. Somebody on the chat dropped the word unity, and I think that was so powerful because I think that's what you're talking about. It's that unification, bringing people together, different backgrounds, but with that same concept of feeling. Because when you don't know other people think like you or are struggling to understand what the directions are and moving around, and you're the only one who's kind of staring at the paper, and I was that kid. Um,
For sure.
you feel alone in it, and you feel you identify being dumb, you identify being stupid, and as soon as you hit those marks, then you're on an uphill battle to pull that pull those strings.
So when did you meet people that helped you to know that you weren't weird or different, or how did you see yourself?
Well, so you got to remember, I went to school at a time where a lot of people didn't talk about dyslexia. You
Right,
know, I
for
think it
sure.
was even a fight for us to prove it existed at one point. So it wasn't till really later on in life when I started meeting people that were like me, and generally a lot of older adults, when I started talking about being dyslexic. And then obviously our student panel and support like that. So those connections, but it wasn't until later. It wasn't until after kind of the school part was done that you kind of felt totally understood, or like how these simple tasks that seem mindless to most people are like the most difficult in the world for you.
For sure. Well, and that's why it's so cool because we let kids in after kindergarten, and they don't feel the stigma. I mean, that's what I love.
That's
Is
what I
you
love.
don't want feel, but the flip of that is having been where what strengths have you brought out of those challenges?
Oh, how me?
Yeah.
Well, I always say like the resilient side of it is kind of the gift. You know, like you can go through. For me, I can push through some, pain. I can, whether it's an endurance sport or running, or it's kind of like all the things are always going to seem kind of hard. So it's like you don't know any different.
Well, and I have to tell you, I have a kid that I mean, I adore all my kids, but this
I can
one,
tell that about you.
well, this one decided he was going to be a tennis pro. And he went to this school where they did in-depth study on stuff. And we studied tennis pros and all these kind of people. And, he plays tennis from 4 until 6 in the morning. And then he goes to school. And if it takes him till midnight to do his homework, he's up till midnight doing his homework. And he just called a couple of weeks ago. He's going to not an alternative school. He's actually going to a school like you and I talked about being the best, where they do more expeditional kind of learning.
Mm-hmm.
But he's on the city's tennis team, on the city high school's tennis team, the district's tennis team, and he went to the regional finals. But I'll tell you what, I mean, he will do whatever it takes, and I see that in so many kids. We had a speaker a long time ago when we first started having speakers, and this guy won the Indy 500, and his name is out of my mind in the moment, and he had broken his back the year before, and a year later he won the Indy. And he said, when you go through the brambles as a child, like what it's like to have dyslexia, nothing after that seems difficult.
Right.
Like, right?
Right. No, it's that give and take though, right? Like I would love it if we had a system that supported that tennis player so that they're not up till midnight, having to do work, and they can get the sleep and the rest and, perform to the best of their ability. But I hear what you're saying, and
No, what I would say to you
yeah.
is his school does support him.
Okay.
However, he won't, if they say only do the first three problems, he'll still
They'll
do
do
everything that's
everything.
expected of everybody else.
But that's no different than like a Michael Jordan's mentality, you know? And you see that in some of these students, and so I get it. I get where
Well,
he's.
don't you think too? It's like the Bransons and the Schwabs and.
Oh, 1000%. They get so laser focused that's okay. So here's the rule on this deal.
Okay.
You get the last word. What would you like to send as a message to, whether it be educators or parents or students or the people out there? Like, what's one thing you got for the? I mean, you dropped a ton of knowledge tonight. So, but what if you got one central message? What would that be?
Well, let me. Wow.
And I can let you think. I'll let you think. I can do a quick plug. We have a pop-up fundraiser this Wednesday, 5 p.m. Pacific time, where we are supporting the Running the Distance Scholarship Fund. We gave out 3 scholarships last year at $1,000 each for students who experience dyslexia and are going on in their education. So we're kind of just trying to continue to progress that fund, and it will be me, the group at Tagalong, and another pro cyclist, just talking about endurance sports as well as the fusion of that and dyslexia. So kind of bringing it to a different audience, but that's going to be happening on Zoom this Wednesday, 5 p.m. Pacific time.
Cool. You still challenged me with something that's huge. The first thing I want to say is to teachers, teach to a child's heart. Again, what I said earlier is when you look into the eyes of a child and you see their heart and you know who they are, you change their lives. To the children, accept yourself and look for your gifts and just have a good time. You know, just really know that everyone has challenges and this one's yours, and own it. And, you know, really speak up for yourself, say what you need, and be willing to be an educator. Because as you know, students are educating teachers all the time. So be patient, be kind to yourself, know that everybody has challenges, and love yourself.
Amazing.
Is that good?
Incredible. You're incredible. You're
incredible.
Amazing. You can come on anytime you want, by the way.
Well, thank you.
Always welcome.
All right.
Thank you so much for taking the time tonight. We're going to connect and we'll figure something out. I'm doing something with you.
July, give Shelby a big hug or whatever one can do in this moment.
I know, air hugs, right? Have a great night. Thank you so much for your time. Yeah. Enjoy. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care, Jer.
Have a good night.
Night. Bye-bye.